The shy maid begged, "I'll do anything a man wants," and I froze stiff. John had always been a quiet man. He preferred the calm of his own company to noisy crowds and asking. Living in a bustling city had never suited him. So, when he finally saved enough money to move into a small, peaceful town, he felt a kind of relief he had never experienced before. The town was quiet, with narrow streets lined with old brick buildings, small shops, and a few cafes where people waved at each other as they passed. It was the kind of place where life moved slower, where the air seemed cleaner, and where every face felt familiar. He had rented a small apartment on the third floor of a building that had stood for decades. The wooden stairs creaked slightly under his steps, and the walls smelled faintly of old paint and dust. To John, it was perfect. The apartment was simple but cozy. The living room had a single window that looked out over the town square, where children sometimes played and shopkeepers arranged their goods in the morning sunlight. A small kitchen was tucked to the side, and a tiny bedroom was at the far end, with enough space for his bed, a dresser, and a small desk where he could work.
Moving in had taken most of the day, and by evening John was exhausted.
He had boxes stacked in every corner, some still unopened, and the apartment looked more like a storage room than a home. He knew he would need help soon, especially with cleaning. He was used to doing everything himself, but the sheer volume of dust and clutter in an old building like this was more than he could handle alone. The next morning, John went to the building manager to ask about cleaning services. The manager, a cheerful woman with round glasses and a welcoming smile, recommended a local maid service. "They are reliable," she said. "First best. You'll feel comfortable with them."
She wrote down the contact information on a small slip of paper and handed it to him. John hesitated for a moment.
The idea of hiring someone to come into his home made him nervous.
He wasn't used to having strangers in his personal space.
But he knew it was necessary. He called the number and arranged for a young woman to come that afternoon. When Clara arrived, John opened the door and immediately noticed her soft, hesitant demeanor. She was small, with dark brown hair pulled back into a neat braid, and she carried a simple cleaning bag. Her eyes, though nervous, had a kind, careful look. She smiled faintly, almost apologetically, as if she feared she might be in the way. She said softly, "I'm Clara. I'm here to clean your apartment." Her voice was barely above a whisper, and she looked at John with a mixture of caution and shyness. John nodded, trying to appear welcoming. "Hello, Clara. Thank you for coming. Please, make yourself comfortable. The apartment is a bit messy." Clara's eyes flicked to the boxes stacked in the corners. "It's okay," she said quietly. She set down her bag and started organizing the cleaning supplies on the kitchen counter, her movements careful and precise. Break. John noticed how she seemed to shrink into herself, almost as if she were trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable. He decided to leave her to work. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable by hovering. Instead, he went to his small desk in the corner and began unpacking some of his belongings. Perhaps occasionally. He glanced at her. She moved quietly, efficiently, but there was a tension in her posture, a nervous energy that he couldn't quite understand. As the minutes passed, John found himself observing her more closely. There was something fragile in the way she carried herself, as if she were afraid that one wrong move might upset the balance of the room. She hummed quietly to herself, a soft, trembling sound that made the silence feel even heavier. He realized she was working hard, probably trying to do a good job to make a good impression. At one point, she paused and looked at him. Her eyes were wide, and she bit her lower lip nervously. Is this how you like it?" she asked. Her voice was hesitant, unsure. John smiled gently. "Yes, That's fine. You're doing a great job, he replied. He meant it. He appreciated her care and effort, even if he didn't fully understand the nervous energy she carried. Clara nodded slightly and returned to her work. She moved slowly but deliberately, dusting the shelves, wiping counters, and organizing things neatly. John noticed that she sometimes paused and glanced around as if she were afraid of doing something wrong. He realized that she might not be very confident in her work. Or perhaps she was simply nervous because she was in someone else's home. The apartment began to change under her hands. Dust disappeared from the corners. Boxes were arranged more neatly, and the air seemed lighter. John felt a quiet satisfaction in watching her work. There was something calming about her presence, even though it was tinged with an awkward tension he couldn't quite place. After a while, Clara moved to the living room. She knelt on the floor, carefully cleaning around the edges of the rug.
John noticed the way she wrinkled her brows slightly whenever she tried to reach a difficult spot, and he felt a pang of concern.
But he wanted to tell her not to strain herself, but he didn't want to interrupt her focus. Then, something unusual happened. Clara stopped cleaning and looked up at him with a strange intensity in her eyes. Her hands paused mid-motion, and she seemed to hesitate before speaking. I'll do anything a man wants, she whispered. Her voice was trembling, and she looked almost afraid of how he would respond. John froze. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. The words hung in the air like a sudden storm, unexpected and shocking. He blinked several times, unsure if he had heard correctly. His mind raced. Did she mean that literally? Was she choking? No, the fear in her eyes told him she was serious, or at least she believed she had to be. The room felt smaller, tighter, almost suffocating. John realized he had no idea how to respond. He wanted to reassure her, to tell her that her job was simply to clean and organize, and that nothing else was expected. But the words felt heavy, difficult to form. He could only stare, frozen, as Clara's nervous gaze searched his face for a reaction. Barrow's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her position on the floor. She looked down at the rug, biting her lip, waiting for a response. John finally forced himself to speak, his voice calm but firm. Clara. You don't have to do anything like that, he said gently. Just clean the apartment. That's all I need. Relief washed over her face in an almost visible wave. Breath. She let out a shaky laugh and nodded. What? I'm sorry. I didn't mean... Her words trailed off, and she returned to her cleaning. But her posture relaxed slightly. John realized that Clara's strange words had come from a place of fear and insecurity. She probably felt that she needed to impress him, to be more than just a maid, to somehow earn his approval. But in that moment he understood that all she needed was kindness, patience, and respect. He had seen the fear in her eyes, and he knew that one careless reaction could have embarrassed or hurt her deeply. The rest of the morning passed in a quiet rhythm. But Clara cleaned with renewed focus, but the tension in the room had lessened. John unpacked his boxes slowly, occasionally offering a word of encouragement. The apartment began to feel more like a home, not just a collection of furniture and belongings, and in that small space a fragile trust was beginning to form between them. One built not on power or fear, but on understanding and respect. By the time the cleaning session ended, John felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. He had witnessed a side of human vulnerability he had rarely seen before, and it left him thoughtful. Clara packed up her supplies quietly, giving him a small, grateful smile before heading for the door. "Thank you for being kind," she said softly. John nodded. "You're welcome, and thank you for your hard work."
I appreciate it. As he closed the door behind her, he sat down on the edge of his bed, letting out a long sigh.
He realized that sometimes the smallest interactions could teach the greatest lessons.
That day, he had learned about patience, empathy, and the quiet power of treating someone with dignity. And although the moment had been shocking at first, it had turned into something he would never forget, a reminder of how fragile and how resilient people can be. The next morning, John woke up to a quiet apartment bathed in soft sunlight. The city outside was just beginning to stir, the distant hum of a car, the occasional chirp of birds, and the faint sound of shopkeepers opening their stores. The calmness of the town was comforting, but John felt a small tension in his chest. He knew that Clara would return that day to continue cleaning, and he wasn't sure how to feel about it. The previous day's strange moment still lingered in his mind. He tried to push it aside. Brace. Maybe he had overreacted. After all, Clara was just a shy young woman, nervous in a new environment, eager to please. Grasp still. The words she had said, so unusual, so out of place, had left an impression. He had never encountered anyone quite like her before. Around 10 in the morning, there was a soft knock on the door. Jean opened it to see Clara standing there, her cleaning bag in hand, looking even more hesitant than before. Her eyes darted around nervously as if she were bracing herself for something she didn't want to happen. "Good morning, Clara," John said, smiling gently. "Come in. You don't need to worry about anything." Clara nodded quietly and stepped inside. She moved slowly, almost cautiously, as if she were afraid the slightest misstep might upset him, or perhaps herself. John noticed the way her hands trembled slightly as she set down her bag. She seemed even more nervous than the day before, and he wondered why. Maybe she had been thinking about the awkward words she had said yesterday and was worried that he might be upset. "Are you ready to start?" John asked, trying to sound as calm and friendly as possible. Breath. "Bah." "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She pulled a small cloth from her bag and began dusting the edges of the living room furniture. John watched quietly, letting her work. He didn't want to overwhelm her with conversation. There was something delicate about her presence that made him careful in how he moved, how he spoke, even how he breathed. As she worked, John began to notice little details about her. The way she straightened the cushions with precision, the careful way she wiped each surface, and the occasional deep sigh she let out when a particularly dusty corner challenged her. She was meticulous, almost perfectionist, but there was an underlying anxiety that made everything she did seem tense.
At one point, Clara paused and looked up at him again.
Her eyes were wide, and there was a strange intensity in her gaze.
John felt his heart skip a beat.
The memory of her words from yesterday, the words that had made him freeze, came rushing back. He wasn't sure he was ready for another moment like that, yet he couldn't look away. I'll do anything a man wants," she whispered again, her voice trembling. It was so quiet that at first John thought he had imagined it. He froze, unable to speak or move.
His mind raced, trying to understand why she would say that again.
She didn't look flirtatious or bold. On the contrary, she looked scared, almost desperate. John realized that she wasn't trying to make him uncomfortable intentionally. She seemed to believe deep down that she needed to offer herself in some way to be accepted, to be approved, or to be noticed. The thought made him feel a mixture of concern and protectiveness. He didn't want her to feel that way. He didn't want her to think that she needed to say such things to keep her job or to please him. He finally found his voice, speaking gently, carefully. Clara, you don't mean to say that. You don't have to do anything like that. His words were soft but firm, carrying the weight of sincerity.
I just need your help with cleaning. That's all.
Your work is already appreciated. Clara's shoulders sagged slightly, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from them.
Psst. She gave a small, shaky laugh, and John could see her relief. Oh, I'm sorry, she said softly.
I didn't mean, I thought. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence.
It's okay, John reassured her. You're doing fine.
Just focus on your work, and everything will be all right. Slowly, she returned to cleaning, her movements still careful, but less tense than before. John noticed that she took occasional deep breaths, as if trying to steady herself. He admired her dedication. Despite her nervousness, she was determined to do a good job, and he appreciated that more than words could express. As the morning continued, John tried to distract himself by unpacking some of his belongings. He had a few boxes left from the move, and sorting them helped him focus away from the strange tension in the room. Still, he couldn't help but glance at Clara from time to time. She moved quietly and efficiently, and he found himself wondering what had made her so nervous in the first place. Was it just shyness or something more? Clara worked in silence for a while, and John began to feel a sense of calm returning to the apartment. The initial shock of her words had faded, replaced by quiet understanding. He realized that sometimes people act out of fear or insecurity, and that patience and kindness could make a world of difference. At one point, Clara moved to the kitchen. She knelt on the floor, scrubbing a stubborn stain near the sink. John watched her carefully, noticing the care she took in each movement. Even her nervous energy didn't take away from the way she approached her work with dedication. He felt a quiet admiration for her, realizing that her strength lay not in boldness or confidence, but in her perseverance and determination. Suddenly, Clara paused and looked up at him again. Burrs! Her eyes were wide and filled with uncertainty. John felt a familiar tension rise in his chest. But she bit her lip, and for a moment he thought she might say the same words again. But instead, she whispered something different this time. I want to do a good job. The sincerity in her voice struck him. He could see that her previous words had been a misguided attempt to prove herself. She wasn't trying to scare or tease him. She was simply afraid of not being enough. John felt a surge of empathy. He realized that all she needed was reassurance, someone to show her that she was valued and respected for who she was and the work she did. Clara, he said softly, you're doing more than fine. You don't have to prove anything to me. I appreciate your effort. That's enough. Breath. She nodded, a small smile forming on her face. The tension in her posture eased, and for the first time, she seemed truly comfortable in the apartment. Breaths. John could see the difference immediately. Her movements became more relaxed, and she worked with a steadier rhythm. The rest of the morning passed with a quiet harmony. Clara cleaned efficiently, occasionally humming softly to herself. John continued to unpack and organize his belongings, glancing at her from time to time. There was a sense of mutual respect growing between them, a silent understanding that each was trying their best. By the time the cleaning session ended, the apartment looked completely different. Dust had disappeared, surfaces were polished, and the air felt lighter. Rough. John felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not just because the apartment was clean, but because he had witnessed a small moment of human vulnerability and kindness. Clara packed her cleaning supplies quietly, giving him a grateful smile before heading for the door. Thank you for being kind, she said softly. John smiled back. You're welcome. And thank you for your hard work. I really appreciate it. As he closed the door, John reflected on the morning. He had learned something important about human nature, that sometimes people act out of fear or insecurity, and that a little patience and understanding can change everything. He realized that Clara's nervousness and strange words had been a test of empathy, not a challenge to him. And he felt proud of himself for handling it with care. The day continued quietly. John sat by the window, watching the town go about its daily life. He thought about Clara and her timid demeanor, wondering what had made her so shy and nervous. He realized that everyone carries hidden struggles, fears, and insecurities. Some show them openly, while others hide them behind quiet words and trembling hands. For John, the experience was a reminder that life was full of unexpected moments, moments that could test patience, empathy, and understanding. And while the memory of Clara's words would stay with him, it would no longer bring tension or confusion. Instead, it would serve as a lesson in compassion and human connection. By the evening, John felt a sense of calm settle over him. The apartment was clean, the boxes were mostly unpacked, and the strange tension of the morning had been replaced with a quiet warmth. He realized that sometimes the most ordinary days could teach the most extraordinary lessons. And though he didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of a deeper understanding, one that would continue to unfold in the days to come, as he and Clara navigated the quiet, delicate balance of trust, respect, and human kindness. The following day, John felt a quiet sense of anticipation as he prepared for Clara's arrival. He wasn't nervous in the same way as before, but a small part of him remained alert, remembering the awkward tension of their first encounter. Mask. He had spent the morning tidying a few things on his own, but there was still plenty that needed attention. The apartment, though cleaner than before, was far from perfect. When Clara arrived, she seemed slightly more confident than the previous day, though there was still a subtle nervousness about her. She carried her cleaning bag with careful hands, her posture a little straighter, as if she were trying to show she was capable. Her eyes met John's briefly, and she gave a faint, shy smile. "Good morning, Clara," John said warmly.
I hope you slept well. She nodded softly.
Yes, thank you. Her voice was still quiet, but it held a little more assurance than before.
John noticed the small improvement and felt a sense of relief. He realized that even small gestures of encouragement could make a big difference for someone as timid as Clara. As she set her bag down and began arranging her supplies, John watched her carefully. There was a certain rhythm to her movements now, a steadiness that had been missing before. She moved with care, but not with the tense hesitation that had marked her first day. It was clear that yesterday's words and the subsequent reassurance had left an impression on her, making her feel safer and more at ease. John decided to focus on his own tasks, unpacking some boxes in the corner while keeping a watchful eye on Clara. But he was curious about her, not in a prying way, but in a genuine interest in understanding her personality. There was something about her quiet determination and fragile demeanor that intrigued him. She wasn't just nervous. She seemed thoughtful, almost careful with her actions, as if she were afraid of doing something wrong. About an hour into the cleaning, Clara paused and looked up at him again. This time there was no dramatic declaration, no tension-filled whisper. She simply hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "I want to make sure I do everything right."
Clara, you're doing wonderfully. You don't have to worry about everything being perfect.
Just focus on what you can do, and that's more than enough.
She nodded, her lips pressing together in a small, relieved smile.
Then she returned to her work, moving more confidently. John noticed how she now approached each task with focus and intention, without the nervous pauses that had marked the previous day. She seemed to have gained a sense of reassurance, an understanding that her work and presence were valued simply for the effort she put in. As the morning continued, John observed small details about her behavior that had escaped him before. When she moved to the living room, she carefully arranged the cushions on the sofa, straightened the rug, and dusted every surface meticulously. Occasionally, she would glance at him, as if seeking silent approval. Each glance, though brief, carried a hint of vulnerability, a quiet hope that she was doing well. At one point, Clara knelt on the floor near a small table, scrubbing a stubborn spot she couldn't quite remove. Breath. Her hands trembled slightly with effort, and John felt a pang of concern. "Do you need any help with that?" he asked gently. "No, I can manage," she replied, shaking her head slightly. Her voice was calm, but there was a quiet determination in her tone. She didn't want to impose, didn't want to be seen as incapable. John nodded, impressed by her resolve, and returned to his own work, letting her continue. A few minutes later, Clara paused again. She looked at him with a mixture of hesitation and something else he couldn't quite name. An intensity, a silent question. Her hands rested on the floor and she seemed to hesitate, almost frozen in place. John felt a familiar tension in his chest, the kind that made him stop mid-action. He wasn't sure what she was about to say, but he instinctively knew it would be important. Breath. I'll do anything to make this right," she whispered, barely audible. The words were different from before but carried the same underlying vulnerability. John froze instantly. His body felt stiff and his mind raced. He understood that she wasn't speaking literally. She was expressing a deep fear of making mistakes, a desperate need to be seen as competent and appreciated. Still, hearing those words so quietly and earnestly left him momentarily paralyzed. Time seemed to slow. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of birds, and even the faint creak of the wooden floorboards felt magnified. John's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to find the right words. One wrong reaction could upset the fragile trust they were building, and he didn't want to ruin the progress she had made. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but gentle.
Clara! You don't need to do anything extraordinary.
"You are already doing very well. Your effort is enough." Breaths. She let out a small, shaky laugh, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly.
Oh, I see.
I want to do everything right, she murmured.
John walked over and knelt slightly to be at her level, careful not to make her feel pressured. "Clara," he said softly, "being perfect is not the goal. Doing your best, learning, and trying to improve is what matters. You're valued for who you are and the effort you put in, not for being flawless." Her eyes filled with a quiet gratitude. She nodded slowly, taking in his words. The intensity in her gaze softened, replaced by a calm focus. She returned to her task, this time moving with purpose but without the trembling hesitation that had marked her previous efforts. The rest of the morning passed in a quiet rhythm. Clara cleaned with steady hands, occasionally humming softly, while John continued organizing his apartment. The tension that had once hung in the air was gone, replaced by a sense of mutual understanding. John realized that moments like these, small, delicate interactions, could teach profound lessons about patience, empathy, and human connection. He watched Clara as she moved around the apartment. She carefully arranged books on the shelf, wiped dust from the windowsill, and polished the kitchen counter. Each action was deliberate, thoughtful, and increasingly confident. John admired her dedication. He understood now that her nervous words were never about him personally. They were about her own fears, her desire to be competent, and her need for reassurance in an unfamiliar environment.
At one point, she paused near the living room window, wiping a streak of dust.
She looked out for a moment, taking a deep breath, and then glanced back at John. Their eyes met, and there was a silent understanding between them. Neither spoke, but John could feel the quiet trust that had formed. He realized that she had begun to believe in her own abilities, and that his calm reassurance had made a difference. By midday, the apartment looked transformed. Her sisters gleamed, the floors were clean, and everything felt organized. More importantly, John could see the change in Clara. Her movements were relaxed, her glances confident, and her nervous energy replaced with a quiet determination. She had begun to trust not only herself, but also the environment around her. Before she left, Clara packed her cleaning supplies and turned to John with a small, grateful smile. "Thank you for understanding me," she said softly.
John smiled back. "You're welcome, Clara."
"And thank you for your hard work. I really appreciate your effort." As she stepped out of the apartment, John felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had witnessed a moment of growth, both for Clara and for himself. He realized that patience, empathy, and understanding could transform even the most tense situations into opportunities for connection and learning. That evening, John sat by the window, reflecting on the morning's events. He thought about Clara's nervousness, her trembling words, and the way she had sought approval through her actions. He understood now that people often express fear and insecurity in unexpected ways, and that responding with kindness could make a profound difference. He smiled to himself, realizing that life was full of small, delicate moments that carried important lessons. Clara's presence had reminded him of the value of patience, understanding, and quiet encouragement. And though he didn't know it yet, this experience would shape how he interacted with others, teaching him to notice vulnerability, respond with care, and value the effort and heart behind every action.
By the end of the day, John felt a deep sense of calm.
The apartment was clean, the boxes were mostly unpacked, and the tension that had once lingered between him and Clara had been replaced by mutual respect and understanding. He realized that the most ordinary days could sometimes teach the most extraordinary lessons, and that the simplest acts of kindness could leave a lasting impact. The following morning, John awoke to a soft golden light spilling through the window. The apartment, now almost entirely clean, felt more like home than ever before. He had unpacked most of his belongings and even arranged a small corner with a comfortable chair and a few personal touches, a plant, a few books, and a small photograph of his family. Despite the calm appearance of the apartment, John knew that today might bring a moment of emotional intensity. Clara would be arriving soon, and he remembered the nervous energy she had carried the past few days. When Clara arrived, she seemed a little more relaxed than the first 2 mornings. Her posture was more upright, and she moved with slightly more confidence. Yet there was still a hint of tension in her shoulders and a quiet nervousness in her eyes. She set down her cleaning bag carefully and gave John a small, shy smile. "Good morning, Clara," he said warmly. "I hope you're feeling ready for today." Clara nodded softly. "Yes." "Thank you," she replied. Her voice was steady, but it carried a quiet undertone of worry. John noticed this immediately. He understood that despite her growing confidence in cleaning, there was still something more that weighed on her. "Would you like some coffee before we start?" John asked, hoping to make her feel more comfortable.
Clara shook her head politely. "No, that's okay."
"I'm ready to work," she said softly. She seemed determined to get started, yet her eyes kept flicking nervously toward him. John realized that she might be unsure of how to act in his presence, still uncertain about boundaries and expectations. As she began tidying the living room, John unpacked a few more boxes, careful not to draw her attention too much. He noticed that she worked with a steady rhythm, but occasionally paused and glanced at him, her brow furrowing slightly. There was a tension there that reminded him of the first day. He knew she wasn't intentionally trying to worry him. It was just her own anxiety and desire to do things correctly. After a while, Clara moved to the kitchen, kneeling by the counter to scrub a stubborn stain. Her hands shook slightly as she worked, and John felt a quiet concern.
He had learned by now that Clara's nervousness often manifested physically.
She was afraid of making mistakes, afraid of disappointing him, and afraid of being judged. All of these fears showed in her trembling hands and hesitant movements.
I'll do anything you want me to, Clara whispered suddenly, almost inaudibly.
Her voice was fragile, filled with desperation and anxiety. John froze, the words echoing in his mind. He had heard something similar before, but this time there was an added weight, a sense of urgency. She wasn't speaking casually. She was seeking reassurance, desperate for guidance and approval. John's heart tightened. He understood immediately that she was not speaking literally or inappropriately. These words were a reflection of her fear, her vulnerability, and her need to prove herself. She wanted to be seen as capable and competent, and in her nervous state, this was how she expressed it. He took a deep breath and spoke calmly, gently. Clara, you don't have to do anything like that. Your work is already appreciated. You're doing very well, and I value your effort. Rask. Clara's shoulders relaxed slightly, and she let out a small, relieved sigh. She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude, yet still tinged with lingering worry. I just want to do everything right, she whispered. John walked over and crouched slightly to meet her at eye level, careful not to make her feel pressured or uncomfortable. Clara, he said softly, no one expects perfection. Doing your best is enough. You are valued for your effort, your honesty, and your hard work, not for being perfect. Her lips pressed together in a small, thoughtful smile. The tension in her body began to ease. She returned to her cleaning with a new calmness, moving with careful intention but without the tremors that had previously accompanied her actions. Breath. John observed her for a moment, silently admiring her resilience. She was small, quiet, and fragile in appearance, yet there was a strong determination in the way she worked.
As the morning progressed, John began to see subtle changes in Clara's behavior. She glanced at him less frequently, focusing more on her tasks. When she did look at him, it was no longer with desperation or fear, but with a quiet sense of assurance, as if she were seeking only confirmation that she was doing well, not approval for her worth. John realized that trust was forming between them, a delicate, cautious trust built on patience, respect, and understanding. During a pause, Clara wiped her hands on a cloth and looked out of the window for a moment. The sunlight highlighted her delicate features, and she seemed to take a deep breath, gathering herself. John noticed how she had begun to carry herself differently, not with the tight, nervous energy from the first day, but with a subtle steadiness. Her confidence, though still quiet, was growing. "You're doing really well today," John said gently. "I can see that you've been practicing and learning. It shows in everything you do." Clara blushed slightly, a small smile tugging at her lips.
Breaths. "Thank you. That means a lot," she murmured. Her words were quiet but sincere, and John could sense the genuine relief behind them.
She wasn't seeking praise frivolously. She simply wanted to know that her efforts were noticed and valued. As they continued, a small mishap occurred. A box she had moved toppled over, scattering a few books onto the floor. Clara froze, her hands hovering in midair, panic flickering in her eyes. Break. John quickly stepped forward. "It's okay, Clara. Don't worry about it. We can fix it together," he said calmly. Desk. She looked at him, wide-eyed, unsure if she should respond. Then she nodded, grateful for his reassurance. Sometimes destined for a moment to catch up the books, and John showed her a better way to stack the heavier items so that they wouldn't fall again. Clara listened carefully, absorbing his instructions, and her nervous tension seemed to fade even further. The rest of the morning continued smoothly. Clara moved through the apartment with increasing confidence, cleaning and organizing with a steady rhythm. John noticed how her nervous energy had transformed into careful attention and focus. She had learned that mistakes were part of the process, and that being human and imperfect did not diminish her value. By midday, the apartment looked immaculate. Surfaces gleamed, the floors were spotless, and every corner had been carefully attended to. More importantly, John could see the difference in Clara herself. Her eyes no longer darted nervously with every movement. Her hands were steadier, and her posture was relaxed yet attentive. She had begun to trust both herself and the environment around her. Before leaving, Clara packed up her supplies and turned to John. "Thank you for helping me feel confident," she said softly.
Her voice was calm, steady, and filled with sincere gratitude. John smiled warmly.
You're welcome, Clara. You've worked very hard, and it shows.
"I'm proud of the progress you've made." As she stepped out of the apartment, John felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The moment had been more than just about cleaning. It had been about building trust, understanding vulnerability, and learning to communicate with patience and empathy. He realized that Clara's timid behavior and nervous words were not weaknesses but expressions of her deep desire to do her best and to be understood. That evening, John sat by the window reflecting on the day. He thought about Clara's quiet determination, her fragile demeanor, and the intensity of her need to do things right. He understood now that every person carries hidden struggles, fears, and insecurities. Right. Some reveal them openly, while others hide them behind quiet actions, whispered words, or trembling hands. He smiled to himself, realizing that life was full of unexpected lessons. He glances around in despair, and the color of tar. He glances around in despair. He glances around in despair, empathy and gentle guidance. He understood that even small acts of kindness, simple words of reassurance, a calm tone, a patient gesture, could transform fear into confidence, hesitation into determination, and nervousness into trust. By the end of the day, John felt a deep sense of calm. The apartment was clean, the atmosphere was light, and Clara's quiet growth had left a lasting impression on him. He realized that moments of human vulnerability could teach more than any book or lecture ever could. And though the events of the morning had been intense, they had strengthened both Clara and himself, forging a connection built on respect, understanding, and empathy. John knew that the coming days would bring more opportunities to observe her growth, more moments of quiet learning and mutual understanding. But for now, he allowed himself to sit back, savoring the peace of the apartment and the subtle, powerful changes that had taken place. In his heart, he felt a sense of hope and anticipation. The experience with Clara had shown him that patience, trust, and compassion were far more powerful than fear, misunderstanding, or anxiety. And as he looked around his now orderly apartment, he realized that the lessons of the morning would stay with him forever, guiding him in all interactions, small and large, throughout his life. The following morning, John woke up feeling an unusual sense of calm. The apartment, now spotless and organized, felt warm and inviting. He had arranged a small corner near the window with a chair, a lamp, and a few books, creating a cozy little reading nook. Even the sunlight streaming through the window seemed gentler, bathing the room in a soft golden hue. He could hear the faint sounds of the town outside, the clatter of a bakery opening, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the distant chatter of people walking through the streets. It was a peaceful morning, and for the first time, John felt that his apartment was truly home. Clara arrived shortly after 10 o'clock, carrying her cleaning bag with her usual careful movements. Breaths pressed, which he consciously summoned the devil's work. He cannot escape from beyond, a son dies and want his own.
She gave John a small, polite smile. "Good morning, Clara," John greeted warmly.
Brett.
You're looking well today.
Clara nodded softly. "Good morning, sir,"
Thank you.
she replied. Her voice was steady, calm, and polite. It carried a quiet confidence that had not been there on her first day. John noticed the change immediately. She had grown more comfortable in the space, more assured of herself, and yet still maintained her natural humility and thoughtfulness. As she set down her bag and began to organize her supplies, John watched her for a moment. He felt a strange mixture of admiration and respect for her. Over the past few days, he had witnessed a remarkable transformation. The timid, nervous young woman who had first entered his apartment had grown steadily more confident, not through force or pressure, but through patient guidance and gentle encouragement. Progress was subtle, yet profound, reflected in the steady movements of her hands and the quiet assurance in her eyes. John decided to focus on his own work while letting Clara continue her cleaning. He unpacked the remaining boxes, arranging them carefully in the corners of the apartment. Occasionally he glanced at her, observing her methodical movements. She cleaned with precision, wiping every surface, dusting the shelves, and carefully organizing the items she encountered. It was clear that she had learned to trust her own judgment, to work without the paralyzing fear of making a mistake, and to take pride in her efforts. After a while, Clara paused near the living room window. She wiped her hands on a cloth and looked out, taking a deep, steadying breath. John noticed that she seemed to be gathering her thoughts, as if preparing herself for something important. Her eyes met his briefly, and he felt the familiar tension of previous days, the unspoken words, the quiet intensity of her gaze.
I want to do everything perfectly," Clara whispered softly, almost as if confessing a secret.
Her voice trembled slightly, but there was also determination in it. John could see that this desire was not about impressing him personally, but about her own standards and her fear of falling short. John walked over and knelt slightly to meet her at eye level, careful to offer reassurance without making her feel pressured.
"Clara," he said gently, "perfection is not necessary."
Brett, doing your best, learning, and caring about your work is what matters. You're already doing very well, and I'm proud of your effort." Pressed together, and a small smile tugged at her face. The tension in her shoulders eased, and she returned to her cleaning with renewed focus. She moved carefully, but there was no longer any hint of panic or fear in her actions. Instead, she displayed a quiet confidence, a steady rhythm that reflected her growing trust in herself and in her environment. As the morning continued, John noticed other small changes. Clara no longer glanced at him constantly for reassurance. Her movements were more deliberate, her decision-making more confident, and her energy less constrained by fear. She seemed to have internalized the lessons of patience, trust, and understanding that John had tried to convey. Her growth was subtle but undeniable, visible in the ease with which she moved around the apartment and in the calm focus she brought to each task. At one point, a small accident occurred. A stack of papers fell from a shelf onto the floor. Clara froze for a moment, her hands hovering in midair. John immediately stepped forward.
"It's okay, Clara."
"Don't worry. We can fix this together," he said calmly. But she looked at him, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. But then she nodded and helped him pick up the papers.
As they worked together,
John noticed that she approached the task with focus and determination rather than fear.
There was a sense of partnership now, a mutual understanding that mistakes were simply part of the process, and that working together calmly could solve any problem. By midday, the apartment looked immaculate. Its surfaces gleamed, floors were spotless, and everything was organized perfectly. More importantly, Clara had grown noticeably in confidence. She moved with quiet assurance, no longer burdened by the tremors of fear and anxiety that had marked her first days. John could see that she had begun to trust herself, trust her abilities, and trust that her efforts were appreciated. Before leaving, Clara packed her supplies and turned to John. "Thank you for helping me feel confident and respected," she said softly. Her voice was calm, steady, and filled with sincere gratitude. John smiled warmly. "You're welcome, Clara, and thank you for your hard work.
I am proud of the progress you've made. Remember, it's your dedication and effort that matter most."
As she stepped out, John felt a quiet satisfaction. The experience had been more than just cleaning. It had been about growth, trust, and understanding. He realized that even small moments of human interaction, simple words of encouragement, patient guidance, and quiet reassurance, could transform fear into confidence, hesitation into determination, and nervousness into trust. That afternoon, John sat in his new reading nook, reflecting on the journey he had witnessed. Clara's timid words, nervous gestures, and careful movements had initially made him tense and unsure. But over time, he had learned to respond with patience and empathy, and in turn, Clara had grown more confident and capable. He understood that true growth often comes from a combination of guidance, understanding, and the freedom to make mistakes. John thought about how easily misunderstandings could occur when people acted out of fear or insecurity. Clara's initial words had been startling, but they had been a reflection of her inner anxiety, not a challenge to him. By responding with care, he had helped her transform that anxiety into confidence. It was a lesson he knew he would carry with him for the rest of his life. The days that followed were marked by a new rhythm. Clara continued her work with quiet confidence, and John continued to observe and encourage her. The apartment remained clean, orderly, and inviting. But more importantly, a mutual respect had formed between them. There was no longer any tension, no nervous hesitation, and no fear of misunderstanding. Instead, there was trust, understanding, and a quiet appreciation for each other's presence. One afternoon, as John returned from a brief walk outside, he found Clara sitting by the window, arranging a small plant on the sill. She looked up and smiled as he entered.
"I wanted to make this corner look nice," she said softly.
"But it feels good to see the apartment like this." John nodded, feeling a warm sense of connection.
"It looks wonderful, Clara."
"Thank you for taking care of it so thoughtfully." She smiled shyly and returned to her task, her movements steady and deliberate.
John realized that her confidence had become internalized.
She no longer relied solely on his approval. She had begun to trust her own judgment, to value her own efforts, and to feel pride in her work.
By the end of the week, John felt a deep sense of fulfillment.
The apartment was more than just clean. It was a space of calm, order, and quiet beauty. And Clara, once timid and unsure, had grown into a capable, confident, and self-assured young woman.
The experience had been transformative for both of them, teaching John about patience, empathy, and the quiet power of encouragement, and teaching Clara about self-trust, growth, and the value of her own efforts. As he sat by the window that evening, watching the sun set over the quiet town, John reflected on the lessons of the past week. Life was full of unexpected challenges, moments of vulnerability, and opportunities for connection.
By responding with kindness, understanding, and patience, he had helped someone grow, and in the process he had grown as well. He realized that the small interactions between people could carry profound meaning.
A simple word of encouragement, a gentle gesture, or a patient explanation could change someone's perspective, build confidence, and foster trust. Clara's journey had shown him that fear and nervousness were not weaknesses. They were opportunities for growth, understanding, and human connection. As night fell, John felt a quiet sense of peace. The apartment was calm, the town was still, and he could hear the gentle rustle of leaves outside. He thought about Clara, her quiet determination, and her growth over the past week. He smiled to himself, knowing that both of them had learned valuable lessons about trust, empathy, and the power of human connection. John understood that their time together had created a bond built not on words alone, but on respect, understanding, and mutual growth. It was a connection that would last far beyond the cleaning of an apartment, a reminder that patience, kindness, and careful guidance could transform fear into confidence and nervousness into trust. And in that quiet, peaceful apartment, John knew that both he and Clara had experienced something rare and valuable, a lesson in humanity, compassion, and the profound strength of quietly supporting one another.